The forest was on fire with war, and I was supposed to be invisible. That was my one job. My only job. Stay hidden behind the ridge, monitor the perimeter, and radio back to Gamma Unit if the Black Fang wolves crossed the northern boundary. I wasn't a fighter. I was barely even a wolf. My shift was weak, my wolf small and pale as winter fog, and every warrior in the Ironclad Pack knew it. Including their alpha. Especially their alpha. Marin, my earpiece crackled. It was Dex, my unit partner, his voice tight with panic. They've broken through the eastern flank. Move now, get back to the tree line. The transmission cut to static. And then I heard it. The sound that every low-ranking wolf learned to fear before they learned to walk. The deep, resonant snarl of an alpha mid-shift. Not a growl, not a warning bark, the full, chest-cracking sound of a creature that sat at the top of every food chain that had ever existed. I ran, I don't know what direction. It didn't matter. My legs made the decision before my brain did, carrying me through the dark tangle of oak and pine while the sounds of battle erupted behind me, bodies hitting earth, the crack of bone realigning, the wet, ugly sounds of wolves fighting wolves. The moon was full and violent overhead, pouring silver light through the canopy in broken columns, and I was so focused on not dying that I didn't look where I was going. I hit something solid. Something warm. Something that was in the middle of shifting. The impact sent us both to the ground, and the world became a chaos of fur and limbs, and a pain so sudden and absolute that I couldn't even scream. It just swallowed me whole, starting from my neck and radiating outward like lightning had been stitched into my bloodstream. Then it was over. I lay on the forest floor, face pressed into the dirt, lungs heaving. Above me, silence. Then a sound I'd never heard from another living thing. Not a growl. Not a snarl. Something broken. Something like horror, wrapped in the register of a wolf that had just realized what it had done. I turned my head slowly. Alpha Kaiden Ashvale was crouched over me, midshift reversed, his massive frame half man and half wolf, his amber eyes wide and locked on my neck. His mouth was red, and when I lifted my hand to touch the burning place below my ear, my fingers came away wet. No, he said, his voice was barely human. No, that's not, I didn't mean to, but the forest disagreed with him. The trees seemed to lean inward. The moonlight thickened, and deep in the oldest, most animal part of me, something that had been sleeping my entire 22 years of life cracked open like an egg on fur. Led, and looked up at the man above me with eyes that already recognized him. Mine, it whispered. And from the expression on Alpha Kaiden Ashvale's face, the horror, the devastation, and underneath both of those, something he was clearly furious at himself for feeling. His wolf had whispered the exact same thing. Chapter 2. The worst possible outcome. He didn't speak for the entire walk back to the pack house. Neither did I, mostly because speaking would have required oxygen. And all of mine was being consumed by the effort of not thinking about the fact that the bite on my neck was warm in a way that had no thing to do with temperature. It pulsed, softly, like a second heartbeat that wasn't mine. The battle had ended by the time we reached the perimeter. The Black Fang wolves rooted. Their scouts scattered back across the boundary. Warriors nodded at their alpha as he passed, their eyes catching on me, dropping to my neck, then snapping away with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed pity. I was Marin Cole. Monitor Unit. Nobody. The girl whose wolf was so pale and quiet that half the pack forgot she existed at meetings. The girl whose mother had been a rogue and whose father had left before she was born, leaving her to grow up on the edges of pack life, accepted but never quite belonging. And now I was the girl the alpha had accidentally marked. The pack doctor, an older woman named Sierra who had the energy of someone who had seen everything and was no longer surprised by any of it, met us at the door. She took one look at my neck, one look at Kaiden's expression, and simply said, "Inside, both of you." The examination room smelled like antiseptic and pine resin. I sat on the table. Kaiden stood in the corner with his arms crossed and his jaw set like stone, staring at a point on the wall that was not my face. Sierra cleaned the wound with efficient hands. She didn't hiss or wince the way I expected. She just worked, and when she was done she stepped back and looked between us with the expression of a woman doing very careful math. "You know what this is," she said to Kaiden. "It was an accident." His voice came out flat. "Controlled. We collided in the field. I was mid-shift." It shouldn't, Alpha." Sierra's voice was gentle but firm. "It doesn't matter how it happened. You know what a mark is. You know what it does." The silence that followed was one of the heaviest things I had ever sat inside. I'd grown up hearing about mate marks the way all pack children did, in hushed, reverent voices, folded into stories told around fires. A mark was sacred, permanent. When an alpha marked their mate, it bound to wolves together at the level of the soul, a biological and spiritual tether that the oldest wolves in pack history called simply the bond. It couldn't be undone. It couldn't be transferred. In all the stories, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Sitting in that examination room with an alpha who clearly wished it hadn't happened, it felt considerably less beautiful. "She'll need to be monitored," Sierra said. "The bond activation can cause disorientation, heightened senses, emotional volatility in the first weeks." She paused. "For both of you?" Kaiden finally looked at me. I wish he hadn't. His eyes were amber in the way that a wildfire is amber, consuming, relentless, too much to look at directly. And in them I saw something he was actively trying not to feel, wrestling it back behind the wall of his authority and his pride, and the very precise way he'd ordered his life. He lost the wrestling match for exactly 1 second. In that second, something in my chest pulled toward him like a tide. Then the wall went back up, and he looked away. "I'll have a room prepared in the main house," he said to Sierra. Not to me, to Sierra. "For monitoring purposes." Kaiden and I started. "I'll find a way to fix this." He moved toward the door. "I'll contact the elder wolves. There has to be there's no reversing a mark." Sierra's voice was not unkind, but it landed like a stone. "You know that." He stopped with his hand on the doorframe. His knuckles were white. "Then I'll find something else," he said and left. I looked at Sierra, she looked at me. "Well," she said, and reached for a bandage. "This is certainly not how most Monday nights go." Chapter 3, Living in the wreckage. The room they gave me was on the 3rd floor of the pack house, East Wing, far from the Alpha's quarters, which I suspected was not an accident. It had a window that looked out over the forest, a bed larger than anything I'd ever slept in, and a silence that pressed against me like hands. The bond didn't care about the distance. I could feel him even through 3 floors and to corridors and all that deliberate space, a low, steady presence at the edge of my awareness, like hearing someone breathe in the dark. When he was tense, I felt tight across my shoulders. When he slept, on the rare occasions I woke at 3 a.m. and felt that particular quality of stillness, I felt something almost peaceful. I hated it, not because it was unpleasant, because it wasn't, because it would have been so much easier to hate if it was. I'd looked him up after that first night, the way you look up a diagnosis you've just been given, methodically, thoroughly, with the specific dread of someone who already knows the news is bad. Alpha Kaiden Ashvale, 28, had taken the alpha position at 23 after his father's death, rebuilt the Ironclad Pack from near collapse, tripled their territory in 4 years. Every account I could find described him the same way: brilliant, ruthless, fair, and completely closed off. He had not, in 5 years of alpha leadership, shown any public interest in finding a mate. Several packmates had privately noted that he seemed to consider the whole concept an inefficiency, which made the accident even richer really, the universe had an exquisite sense of irony. I saw him for the first time after that night on the fourth day, in the pack house kitchen at 6 in the morning. He stopped in the doorway when he saw me. I froze with my coffee mug halfway to my mouth. The bond lit up like a signal flare, warm, bright, embarrassingly obvious, and we both had the identical response of pretending it wasn't happening. "Good morning," I said. "You should be resting." "I've been resting for days." Sierra said I should avoid stressful situations. I met his eyes. She didn't say anything about coffee. Something moved across his face. Almost humor. Then it was gone. "I'm still working on a solution," he said, pouring his own coffee with the focused energy of a man defusing a bomb. "There isn't one. There might be a workaround. A suppression ritual." The elder in the Kaiden. His name came out of my mouth before I could stop it. Not Alpha. Not Alpha Ashville. Just his name, the way you say someone's name when you know them, and the bond did something complicated and warm in my chest. He stilled. "I grew up in this pack too. I know the lore the same as you. A mark is a mark." The muscle in his jaw worked. "I understand that you didn't choose this," I said quietly. "I didn't either. But standing in my kitchen at 6 in the morning pretending there's a solution you haven't found. Yet it's not helping either of us. It's not your kitchen. It's not yours either, it's the pack's kitchen." Another near miss of something like a smile. He turned and left his coffee on the counter, untouched, and I stood there in the pack house kitchen with the bond pulling gently at my sternum like a kite string, watching him go. Chapter 4, The Things He Couldn't Stop. It started small. On the 6th day, after a training session I'd been cleared to return to, I came back to my room to find a new pair of running shoes outside my door, my size, better quality than the ones I'd had. No note. On the 8th day, when I mentioned at dinner, in a general, non-directed way, to the table at large, that the night patrols must be exhausting given the recent Blackfang activity. The patrol schedule was quietly restructured the following morning to include better rotation and rest periods. On the 11th day, I was reviewing perimeter reports in the strategy room. I'd been reassigned from monitor duty to analysis. Another quiet, directionless change that had simply appeared in my schedule, and I'd mentioned to no one in particular that the overhead light was giving me a headache. An hour later, someone had replaced the fluorescent bulb with a softer one. He was watching out for me. He was doing it covertly, through third parties, through administrative changes, through small and technically deniable adjustments. He was taking care of me the way a man, who had decided he wasn't going to take care of someone, still couldn't stop himself from taking care of them. I knew, because I was doing the same thing. When the bond pulsed tight and anxious at 2 in the morning, I didn't sleep until it eased. When he pushed himself, and I could feel it, the specific flavor of exhaustion that wasn't mine, carrying the weight of 37 pack members' well-being, I found reasons to be near the strategy room, near the training ground, near wherever he was, without making it obvious. I brought reports. I asked questions about patrol analysis. I was very professionally present, and he always stood exactly far enough away from me to maintain plausible deniability. It couldn't last. It didn't. Chapter 5. The moment the wall came down, the elder arrived on the 14th night. Her name was Voss. She was ancient in the way that certain wolves become ancient, not just in years but in weight, in the sense that she carried generations of knowledge in her bones. She arrived without ceremony, requested a meeting with the Alpha, and then looked at me across the pack house entrance hall and said, "Bring her." The three of us sat in Kaiden's study. He sat behind his desk with his arms crossed. I sat in one of the chairs in front of it. Voss stood by the window, looking out at the trees, and I had the distinct impression she was not actually looking at the trees. "You want to know if it can be undone?" she said. "Yes," Kaiden said. "No," she said. There must be. There isn't. She turned from the window. Her eyes were pale, almost silver, and they moved between us slowly. I've had 2 weeks to research since your packmaster contacted me. I've checked every record, every account, every piece of lore that exists. A mark is a bond and a bond is a mark, and neither has ever been successfully severed. She paused. There are records of attempts. They don't end well. Then a suppression. A suppression only suppresses, it doesn't dissolve, and a suppressed bond is like a wound that can't close, it festers. She looked at Kaiden with the particular patience of someone who has watched powerful young people argue with reality before. You already know all of this, you've always known it. The study was very quiet. I looked at Kaiden. He was staring at his desk, jaw locked, and I could feel in the bond what he wasn't showing on his face. Not just frustration, not just the particular helplessness of a man who solves every problem put in front of him encountering one he cannot solve, but something else. Something layered underneath all of it that he'd been working very hard not to examine. Why did you bring her? He asked, finally looking at the elder. If the answer is what you've already told me, why did you ask me to bring her? Voss looked at me, because the question I actually came to answer isn't whether the bond can be undone. She folded her hands. It's whether the two of you are making each other worse by trying to undo it. Silence. The bond is active, she continued. Has been since the first night. You've both been managing it, compensating, adjusting, maintaining careful distance. But the bond isn't a thing you can negotiate with. She looked at Kaiden. You've been trying to protect her from something you think you did wrong. And you? She looked at me. You've been trying to make yourself smaller so he doesn't feel more guilty. And all of it is causing exactly the kind of stress that makes a new bond unstable. Unstable how? I asked. A new mate bond requires, she paused, choosing her words, proximity, acknowledgement. It isn't enough for it to exist, it needs to be tended. A bond that is fought, ignored, or suppressed doesn't weaken, it intensifies, becomes erratic in the long term. It causes pain, real pain, physical. I felt Kaiden go very still. There has to be another. Kaiden, the elder's voice was not unkind. But it was final. I watched your father spend 20 years building walls around himself and I watched what it cost him. I am not going to watch you do the same. She gathered her coat. I'll let myself out. She left. The door clicked shut behind her. The study was silent except for the fire in the grate and the low sound of the wind outside. And I sat across from the alpha of the Ironclad Pack in the silence we'd been building toward for 2 weeks. And neither of us said anything for a long time. Then he said, I'm sorry. His voice was rough, quiet. Nothing like the alpha register he used in meetings and in the field. The one that carried authority and distance like armor. This was just his voice. For the mark? I asked. For everything after it. He finally looked at me. Really looked, the way he hadn't since that night in the examination room. For making you feel like a problem I was trying to solve. You're not, he stopped. That's not how I know, I said. You don't. You can't. Because I haven't. He stood from behind the desk, moved to the window the elder had stood at, and looked out at the same trees she had. I built my entire life around the idea that I didn't need, that I couldn't afford to need. He stopped again. Things you can't control, I finished quietly. A long pause, yes. I stood, moved toward him slowly, the bond pulling quiet and steady and warm the closer I got, like walking toward a hearth. I stopped a few feet away and looked at the reflection of the fire in the glass, and his reflection in the glass. And I thought about small adjustments to fluorescent bulbs and running shoes left outside doors. You've been taking care of me for 2 weeks, I said. I've been, he stopped. Couldn't finish the denial. It didn't feel optional. I know, I looked at his reflection. Neither did staying up until the bond eased when you worked till late. Neither did finding excuses to be near the strategy room when you were stressed. I looked at him directly now, and his eyes were on mine in the glass. I think we've both been terrible at pretending. Something in his expression shifted. The wall didn't come down, it was more like a door opened in it, small and careful. I don't know how to do this, he said. There's no protocol for. Neither have I. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. There's no protocol for any of this. Your wolf bit me by accident during a battle because I ran into you in the dark. There's nothing about this situation that has a protocol. He turned from the window. We were close now, closer than we'd been since the forest, and the bond was warm and full and nothing like a wound. What do we do? He asked. Genuine. No alpha authority. Just a man asking a question he didn't know the answer to. I thought about it. I said, we stop trying to undo it. And we figure out what it actually is. The fire crackled. Outside, the forest was still. Slowly, carefully, like a man who had spent years forgetting how to do something he'd always known, Kaiden Ashvale reached out and took my hand. The bond exhaled. Chapter 6. What comes after it was not simple after that. I want to be clear about that, because the stories always skip this part. They get to the moment and then they cut to the after, all warmth and resolution, as if the getting there is the whole thing. It wasn't the whole thing. There were arguments. Real ones, with edges, because we were two people who had spent years being self-sufficient in completely opposite ways. Him through control, me through invisibility, and neither of us was naturally good at being known. There were mornings when the bond felt like too much and he needed to be alone in the strategy room for 2 hours before he could speak to anyone, and I had to learn that it wasn't about me. There were nights when I felt so raw and new in this life that had suddenly expanded that I locked my door and cried quietly, and he sat on the other side of it without speaking until I was done, which was the right thing to do even though I'd never told him it was. He was not a soft man. I don't want to write him as one, because he wasn't. He was exacting and occasionally too quiet and genuinely terrible at explaining his own reasoning to other people. He could hold a grudge with geological patience. He had opinions about pack logistics that he expressed with a passion more appropriate to religious conviction, but he learned me. Methodically, attentively, with the same thoroughness he gave to everything that mattered to him. The way he had learned the Black Fang patrol patterns and the eastern boundary weaknesses and every name in the pack. He learned me. What I meant when I said I was fine in that particular tone. What silence I needed and what silence frightened me. The specific way the bond felt on a hard day, to me, when he couldn't feel his own grip on it. And I learned him. The alpha register was the armor. Underneath it was someone who had been carrying the weight of other people's safety since he was 23 years old and who had never, not once, put that weight down for long enough to figure out who he was without it. On a cold morning in November, 3 months after the battle in the forest, he told me that we were in the kitchen, the pack house kitchen that belonged to everyone, and he was making coffee badly in the way he always made coffee, which was too strong and not sweet enough. And he said it the way he said everything important, quietly, without looking up. As if volume would make it more true than he could handle. I don't know who I am outside of being alpha, he said. I watched him. I think I've been afraid of what's left if I put it down. He looked up then. But with you, the bond, it's not like having less. It's like having a room I didn't know was there. I didn't say anything romantic. I didn't know how and neither did he, and we'd both made peace with that. I just moved next to him and took over the coffee, because his was terrible, and he let me, and we stood in the gray November morning with our shoulders touching and the bond settled and quiet between us like something that had always been there, waiting to be found. Epilogue 1 year later. There is a ceremony for the formal recognition of a mate bond. I'd seen it twice before in my life, once when I was a child, standing at the edge of a crowd too old and too loud for me to push through, seeing only the raised hands of people I didn't know well enough to celebrate. It's old, the ceremony. Older than the pack house, older than the territorial boundaries, older than most of the lore anyone can still remember the origin of. The alpha and his mate stand before the pack at the full moon. The elder speaks. They confirm what the bond already knows. I hadn't expected it. We hadn't spoken about it. Kaiden was not a man who made grand gestures. He showed up in small ways, constant and reliable as weather, and I'd thought that was the whole of it. I was good with that. I was more than good. But on the night of the November full moon, he came to my room, his room now, ours, though we'd arrived at that gradually and without ceremony, and he was in his good jacket, which he hated, and he looked at me with those amber eyes that had become the most familiar thing in my world, and he said, "You don't have to. It doesn't change the bond. It's already," he stopped. "I just want them to know." He wanted the pack to know. The pack that had forgotten I existed at meetings. The pack that had looked at my weak wolf and my absent father and decided I lived on the edges. He wanted to stand in front of all of them at the full moon and say, "This person is mine. This person matters." I put on my good jacket too. The ceremony was not long. The elder spoke her old words that nobody fully understood anymore and that meant everything anyway. The pack stood in a wide circle around us, torchlight and moonlight, and when Kaiden took my hand in front of all of them, the bond did what it always did now, settled, warm and full and permanent. He looked at me. I looked at him. I thought about a girl running through a dark forest, too small and too unimportant, colliding by accident into the one thing she hadn't expected. I thought about the way the universe occasionally disguises its best work as a catastrophe. "I'm going to be bad at this sometimes," he said quietly, too low for anyone else to hear. "I know," I said. "And you're going to be absolutely infuriating, yes." The corner of his mouth moved. "Yeah," he said, "okay." He squeezed my hand once. The moon was enormous overhead. The pack was witness. And the bond, the one that had begun as an accident in a dark forest, that two people had spent weeks trying to fight and undo and deny, the bond that had been the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrongest possible circumstances, simply shone, quiet and irrefutable, between us. Not a mistake anymore, maybe never really a mistake, maybe just the universe, doing what it does, refusing to let two people who needed each other stay lost in the dark.